So I've been getting a lot of questions on this deck, and I figured I'd put together maybe some content with some replays and a deck tech for everybody, because it's just easier than answering all the PMs that I get all the time now. So this is the deck right now. It's pretty set. If you are paying attention to my list, I've cut a Misty for a Verdant Catacomb, and the reason for that is you really want to Fatal Push off a Swamp in the matches where your life total matters, and a big thing that happens in those games is the Growth Spiral and do the Fetch Land into the Swamp. So you go Growth Spiral, put in a Fetch Land, and then you Fatal Push something. And the way to not take 3 off that is to have a Delta or a Verdant, and the Misty kind of makes you take 3. I also think the split is a little bit better, because if you have, like, well, before, if you had a bunch of Misties, you couldn't do that, but now if you have Misty and a Verdant, it's functionally better, because you can do that. So that's where I am at with the mana base. The only other card in the mana base I'm really considering right now for cuts is this third Breeding Pool. I really like having enough green sources to reliably fracture and gust in the sideboard games, but I do take a lot of pain, and there's a lot of burn and aggressive decks online, and I feel like probably cutting this for something else might be a little bit better. So the main goal with the mana base is, I'll just pull out the lands that cast Cryptic Command. So the goal is to pretty much always have Cryptic Command on turn 4, and to try to have Abrupt Decay and Assassin's Trophy before that too. So that means Overgrown Tomb can't cast these spells, and Overgrown Tomb can't cast Cryptic Command. So I'm priced into having these basics for Blood Moon decks. So my question is, I'd have to cut a Cryptic Command casting land or the Field of Ruin to play the Overgrown Tomb, and I don't think that's worth it right now. So the Field of Ruin is in here for Tron, and for Valakut, and for Cavern Souls in Amulet Titan. It's good with the Pulse, and it's pretty important because you, in some of the games, you want to Assassin's Trophy or Field of Ruin, and then surgically extract like a Valakut or a Tron land, and that's pretty great. Another thing about the Field of Ruin is it often gets cut in the matchups where you're slimming down the deck and going to 24 lands, so don't be afraid to cut it in the post-board game. So the main, so next would probably be the 1 CMC spells. So the ops are here over something like more Hieroglyphic Illumination to allow your Snapcasters to come down early, and for value, you gotta smooth out your draw. When you're playing this deck, often the goal is to find a Growth Spiral on turn 2, or to find a Remand on turn 2, and Opt really helps you do that in a way that Hyro doesn't. When you're going off, Opt and Hyro are very similar in the value that they generate, because Opt sees 2 cards and Hyro sees 2 cards. And when you're going off, you're looking for very specific cards that let you go over the top of people. So if you opt into a Snap, a Cryptic, or a Blue Sun or a Teachings, like, things you can do are nuts. Or if you Hyro, sometimes you just draw a land and the card that actually does something. So when you have Wilderness Wreck, your lands are really good because they tap for double, but oftentimes you're really looking for one of these payoff cards that just spiral you into snowballing out of the game. So that's why the Ops are here over the Hyros. The Spell Snare is here because it's a good Teachings grab. Turn 0 Teachings to Spell Snare for 5. It also is really good to Growth Spiral in a land and then Spell Snare. Like if you're on the play and you Spiral in a land and Spell Snare to turn 2 play, you generally get so far ahead that it is hard to lose. So that is why that is here. The 2 Fatal Push is, the Fatal Pushes are the best removal spells in the deck. There's only 2 because I want enough removal, but I also want to diversify removal, so I'll probably talk about this as the whole package over here. So the 2 pushes are just the best removal spell that you can have. They let you keep up with Burn, Spirits, Humans a little bit. Raising the CMC of your spells is a really high cost because you can't Growth Spiral them. So you'll see the other 2 Fatal Pushes are in this sideboard right now. So the Fatal Pushes are just the best one. That's why there's 2 of them. And the other ones is Devour Flesh. So this is basically Diabolic Edict with upside in this format, in this deck. Their life total really doesn't matter. So this is really good against Boggles, it's good against Thrun. It's good against all this random nonsense that people try to like smash me with out of the sideboard, like Geist of Saintcraft. But its main use is against Shadow. So if you Devour Flesh and they have any amount of shadows out and they don't have a Gurmag or a Snap, all their shadows die. And that is a pretty important line because it, first of all, when people didn't know about that, they'd often jam a bunch of shadows at me and just get blown out by teachings for Devour Flesh. But now people can't commit like triple shadow or multiple shadows against me at the same time, and that gives me a little bit more time to kind of do other things. So that's great. The other two removal spells is Abrupt Decay. So this is the better one. So Abrupt Decay is really good in this deck. It is your answer to Blood Moon, Chalice, Liliana, all this nonsense, and it also can't be countered, which is huge. So sometimes you can go get it off teachings, and you can assume that they're trying to counter your follow-up spell for tempo reasons, and you just go get Abrupt Decay, and you kill like a Vendilion Click, and they can't really interact with that, which is pretty great. So the Assassin's Trophy is here. I think this is the worst card in the deck. I think it's a necessary evil. So it's an answer to Planeswalkers in the main. Planeswalkers really don't bother you that much because they're very hard to resolve against you because your spells are all instant and you have these quad remand. So your Planeswalkers really don't bother you that much. But the main reason for the trophy is to hit lands in some of the matchups. So if you can hit a Tron land and then snap back, hit a Tron land, it'll often give you enough time to just get ahead. Come out with Cryptic Command, it gives you an actual plan against Tron. And it's just a generally okay card. I think 1 in the 75 is required, because a lot of the post-board games you want to trophy something and then extract it for like a Tron land, and you need 1 in the deck to do that. So I'd rather put it in the main than in the sideboard because it has versatility. So in the 2 CMC spells we have Remand and Growth Spiral. So this is your basic get ahead package. So Growth Spiral lets you put in a land on their turn, and Remand counters a spell and puts it into the owner's hand. So the main reasons for these cards is they just let you get ahead of people. So if you're ever remanding a spell that costs more than 2, the tempo is huge. If you're remanding a 2, it's just going to buy you time. And if you have Growth Spiral, often a common line in the deck is to Growth Spiral in your 3rd land, untap Wilderness Reclamation, and then put up the Teachings or the Cryptic. And once that's out, you're very hard to interact with because you just have double mana every turn. You're doing things at instant speed, and if your opponent tries to do anything, you have a Cryptic or a Remand, and then Wilderness Mana is just going to pull you further and further ahead. So the other card here is Logic Knot. So this is basically just Counterspell as a one-of. So it's in here to turn Teachings into like a 6 CMC counter sometimes, but it's also just a good one-of. Pulse. I'll go through actually the snaps. So snaps, these are like probably your main win con, or one of the main win cons in the deck is just playing a Snapcaster and just hitting them for a bunch. You'll see that people can't really commit resources to killing a Snapcaster because that's not the axis they want to fight you on. When they have to like get through all your other stuff, and Snapcaster can just end up running away with games in this deck. Once again, the Snapcasters enable your remands to be good. They enable your ops to be good. They enable all this removal to be really good. A big part of the Snapcasters is the sideboard cards, which we'll get to in a bit. Another common important point about the Snapcasters is Snap, Pulsa, Marasa is kind of an absurd combination of cards. If you have a Pulse and a Snap in your graveyard, you can Pulse the Snapcaster and then Snap the Pulse, and then block with a Snap and then Pulse the Snap back. It functions a lot like a green Kolaghan's command in this deck, but you're not really going after making them discard, and the 6th life is often there to just pull you out of range against any deck trying to kill you. So that is really good. I don't think I would ever cut this card. And then moving into the 4 CMC, we got Hyro. So this card is here because it is sometimes a Teachings target, and it's sometimes better than Opt. I don't like it that much, but I think having the split is a little bit better than having the 4x Opt, because sometimes it is a Teachings target. And it's okay. So at 4 CMC we have really the meat of the deck. So the Wilderness Reclamations is the card that lets you go off and snowball, And then these teachings and these cryptics are kind of the cards that let you do some kind of absurd things. So the main thing is teachings. The way that it works is you're going to cast a Wilderness Reclamation, so that comes into play, and then you're going to hold up a cryptic or teaching. So if you have a teachings, you can just go get a cryptic, and then on your next turn you'll have 5 lands and a teachings in your graveyard, which is conveniently enough to go to end step, float 5 mana, tap another land, and teachings for another cryptic. And at that point, you can just cast Cryptic Command like a jillion D times and get ahead of the game. So if they don't have interaction, they can just get Cryptic for like 7 turns in a row. And if you ever find the Sacrifice Wilderness Reclamation, you can just bury them in a Nexus of Fate or Blue Sun loop. And if you don't, you can just leverage the tempo and just keep getting ahead. So what this deck does a lot is... it just gets really far ahead of you, and then it just kills you with literally anything. It doesn't really matter. So the teachings set up the Cryptic command locks, and they also set up Nexus of Fate and Blue Sun, so not only can you go get whatever card you want to win the game with, or to defend yourself with here, but you can go get these win conditions. So if you ever have enough mana, getting a Blue Sun and just drawing like 7 cards is completely bonkers, and if you ever need to really go off, you can loop Nexus of Fate and Teachings and just keep taking a bunch of turns, getting farther and farther ahead. And that typically eats most of your mana if you only have 1 Reclamation, but if you then find the second Reclamation, you just have another set of mana to work with, and sometimes you can just set that up into Nexus or Blue Sun shenanigans. So another important part of the deck is these Cryptic commands. So the Cryptic commands often tap draw mode on them is nuts in this deck, because it's basically like a fog deck once it goes off. But the other important mode is the bounce draw mode with Snapcaster Mage. So if you have enough floating mana, you can cycle every Cryptic command out of your graveyard with these Snapcasters on the bounce draw mode. So that's really important. And then once you get going, so this Nexus and this Blue Sun, the Nexus basically lets you loop your deck. It also lets you take a bunch of turns with teachings and get super far ahead. And the Blue Sun, there's 2 reasons for the Blue Sun, and that is, first of all, you're going to throw a bunch of midi Blue Suns at yourself to get ahead of somebody, and then untap with all your mana up, and that's really hard to beat. Every time you do that, Blue Sun goes back into your deck, and you just keep doing that over and over and over again, pulling it out with teachings, until you're basically in an unlosable board state. The other thing is, when you have enough mana, you can Blue Sun for almost your whole deck, or your whole deck, and then Nexus of Fate on Blue Sun will be the only cards in your deck. You can have triple Reclamation in play, and go to end step, cast a Nexus. On your next turn, you can triple Reclamation, Blue Sun them out. The other loop is you literally just cast Nexus of Fate, and then you hit them to death with Tar Pit or a Snapcaster, and if they have an untapped guy, you can just probably find a Cryptic command because you've picked up your whole deck and tap it first. But Creeping Tar Pit also is unblockable, which is just a hilarious upside on this deck in case they do find somebody to get blockers on you. So the other important part of this deck is the sideboard, and the sideboard is probably what makes this deck. If you're just playing it and trying to pick it up, you're not really going to see the true power of the deck until you go to the sideboarded games. And the reason for that is the Snapcaster Mages and the Mystical Teachings form a really good sideboard package of reusing your one-of. So any one-of that you have in the deck gets really amplified by these 6 cards. So let's say I have Fracturing Gust in the Hardened Scales matchup. First of all, I'm Growth Spiraling into Teachings to find it, and then if I fire it off once, I can Snapcaster it back. So this card like 10 for 1s them, and then you can snap back your 10 for 1. And it's just kind of absurd. So once again, this is a deck that has an amazing sideboard, and if you just play main deck games, you will not understand the power of the deck. So in the sideboard, we're going to go through every card, and I'm going to explain what it's all here for. Right now, we're going to start with this Life Goes On. And the second Life Goes On is kind of a flex spot. So there is a lot of burn online, and people have really taken to skewer the critics and light up the stage. and kind of this black burn list is popping up over the red-white burn list a lot of the time. And Life Goes On is just an absurd magic card with Snapcaster Mage and Fatal Push. So if you ever line up your cards right, it is virtually a 3-for-1 for 1 mana, and you can Snapcaster back your 3-for-1 for 1 mana. And that just makes it really hard to lose when you go find this. I think 2 might be overkill, and the value of the sideboard cards in this deck is really high, so this 1 Life Goes On as a flex spot. Right now, the card I have my eye on is either Redirect or Murderous Cut, and the reason for that is Redirect is kind of an okay counterspell in counterspell mirrors. It's also incredible against Ancestral Visions, which these Electro Dominance decks are picking up. And this deck has a lot of trouble against people chaining Ancestral Visions on you. So I think if you have a Redirect, it'll help out there. The other thing is it's an okay card against Burn, because it's basically 2-for-1 counterspell if you throw it on a creature, and if not, it's just a counterspell for a random burn spell. So it's a card that does a little bit against Burn, does a little bit against Control, and does a little bit against Ancestral Visions. So yeah. Anyway, the other card I have my eye on right now is Murderous Cut, and the reason for that is Gurmag Angler specifically out of Shadow decks. So in post-board games against Shadow, you'll see there's a lot of Fatal Pushes going on, and Shadow is pretty hard to stick against you. But Gurmag Angler is the premier threat, and if they just ride out a Gurmag Angler and try to stub all of your relevant Gurmag Angler interaction, it can get quite hard. So I'm thinking Murderous Cut is probably the best card that I could play to kill Gurmag Angler reliably. So the other sideboard cards are 2 Fatal Push. So these are your removal spells against deck that don't cost a lot. They're basically Swords to Plowshares, because, well, you're really bringing these in against decks that don't have 4 CMC dudes, but sometimes they do. Good examples of this would be Vanafer decks, or Humans, Spirits, Burn. Any deck that's trying to go really low and really fast against you, Fatal Push is the best card. And the 2 CMC removal spells really don't offer as much as Fatal Push, because they don't let you keep pace. It's also really nuts with the Growth Spiral, so I think that going under 4 Fatal Pushes in the 75 is a mistake right now. So I wouldn't do that for anyone picking up the deck. I know my older list had 3. I think that's a mistake. So other cards, this Rejection. So this Rejection is for Tron. It's for any colorless Eldrazi decks. It's for Ad Nauseam, or anyone trying to like jam any colorless spells on you. The efficiency is just really high, and they turn Snapcasters into 3 CMC hard counters, and that's just like an incredible rate. So Teachings for Ceremonious Rejection is pretty great. So in the sideboard games, what you'll see a lot of the time is the Teachings doesn't get me my full combo. It'll just get me enough of a tempo advantage by getting like a really good priced card, like a Life Goes On or a Rejection, and then that'll let me keep up with them and then have time to flashback the back half of Teachings. So Rejection is one of those cards where it's 1 CMC and it is perfect for that role. So other cards, Echoing Decay. So this is a really unique card that's not really getting a lot of play right now. I think it's actually quite good. So the reason it's in this deck is, there's a couple things. One is it's really good at cleaning up Phoenixes that are on the battlefield against you, because it does it all -2/-2 to all creatures with the same name. And in this deck, you'll see there is a Surgical and a Crypt Incursion in the sideboard. So you're really trying to clean up all the Phoenixes with this 1-2 punch. It also protects you from tokens, and against some of these faster decks that just jam 4x cards on you, it can sometimes just 2-for-1 people, and that's really great. So all the Noble Hierarch decks, Kitesail Freebooter, Meddling Mage, Goblin Guide, Swift Spear, all these decks can sometimes just try to have these multiple creature draws against you. And if you have the Echoing Decay as your 2 CMC spell, which beyond Fatal Push and maybe like a Disfigure and maybe the 1x Murderous Cut that I'm considering, there's really not a lot of 2 CMC spells that do much more than kill a dude. So that's why the Decay is in here as maybe a 2-for-1, but also protection from tokens and an answer to Phoenixes. So the other cards, Surgical. So Surgical is obviously a staple of Modern at this point, really good against Phoenix, really good against other things. The other important part about it in this deck is you can combo with Assassin's Trophy to strip lands against Tron, and and it also just sometimes just takes whatever card is very difficult for your deck to interact with. Like against Shadow, I've taken Gurmag Angler before, just to change how the match plays out. But when they don't have the Gurmag Angler ride it to victory with Stubline on you, it's very difficult for them to win with Devour Flesh or Fatal Push, checking their shadows, and then then you basically have inevitability on them. So the other thing is Surgical is also good against other random nonsense decks that have some type of interaction against you, like Ad Nauseam. Playing against Ad Nauseam, they had Pact of Negation, and after I Surgicaled the first one, all my counter spells were basically invincible, and I can just hold up whatever I wanted. So this Surgical has a lot of uses. It's also really good against Phoenix, as everybody knows, and yeah, so it's just generally great. Crypt Incursion, so this card gains a lot of life. It's great in the burn matchup. It's also great against Dredge, and it's good against Phoenix. So it's just another card that you have to pull yourself ahead. And I wanted one Grave Hate card in the sideboard. This is a Ravenous Trap, and I went with the Crypt Incursion to have a little bit more game against Dredge and any deck trying to like bolt me out with Phoenixes. So that's why that's there. So cards. So Shadow of Doubt. Shadow of Doubt is really interesting card. It's not really played a lot. It's really hard to play around because, first of all, there's only one of in the deck, so why would you play around it? And it's not a very common effect. Its main use is just as a 2-mana 2-for-1 on either a fetch, but it also has a lot of application against any deck trying to search their library. So say you hit Expedition Map or Sylvan Scrying or Court of Calling, Teleria West. There's a lot of cards that search people's decks right now, and this is really good against them. This card is also insane against Summoner's Pact because they still have to pay for the pact on their next turn. So you'll see that Shadow of Doubt more than earns its keep if you play this deck. Once again, this card, complete blowout on Summoner's Pact, and often against decks, it can be basically 2-mana Cryptic Command of counter draw a lot of time. It's also pretty important to not let Amulet Titan find their Cavern of Souls for free, because Cavern of Souls is one of the ways that they can actually beat you. So yeah. Other cards. Consume the Meek. This is your Wrath. It comes in against humans, spirits. He try to kill you with 3 CMC or lower creatures. Comes in against Dredge as just another board wipe that kind of buys you 1 turn. So this is really important. I would never cut this card, and it is pretty much the reason you have any game against humans or spirits in the post-war games. Fracturing Gust. So Fracturing Gust is probably one of the better cards in the deck, or in the sideboard. It is pretty much unbeatable against a lot of decks. War Prison just cannot beat this card in a million years. And Hardened Scales just gets destroyed by this card because not only does it take all their artifacts, but also takes all the Hardened Scales off the battlefield. So unless you die to like it, and it pulls you out of range. Unless you start dying to stuff, like Infect, it's pretty hard to just lose once you cast your Fracturing Gust. A really important note, though, is the Fracturing Gust does kill your Wilderness Reclamation, so you have to watch out for that. One really important line that you'll see of in the deck is oftentimes you will want to do some nonsense with Remand. And this comes up with Fracturing Gust and the Fatal Pushes a lot, actually. So if you go to your end step and you float all your mana, you untap your lands, and then you go to cast Fracturing Gust, if they have Ravager or Welding Jars, they'll often try to sack a bunch of shit against your Fracturing Gust. to prevent you from gaining the life. And if they do that, you can often just remand your own Fracturing Gust to your hand and just not cast it. So if they have a Ravager, they sack their whole board, you remand your Fracturing Gust, you're not even down a card, and they just rest themselves, and they can't beat your second Fracturing Gust, and the game's just over. So that is nuts. That also comes up a lot with Fatal Push and things like Selfless Spirit or Mausoleum Wanderer. If they just sack it, you can remand your own Fatal Push, get it back. And this comes up a lot against counter spells too. If people try to interact with you on your end step, you just remand your own spell and you draw a card. I've done it with Pulse of Murasa against a Skullcrack before. There's just a lot of lines where you remand your own spells in this deck because you have so much mana and it gets you so far ahead. So back to the other cards. So we have Dispels. Dispel is... This is probably the best Dispel deck I've ever seen. So Dispel basically lets you stick Reclamation, that lets you untap all your lands. There's no negate in the deck because you really don't care what they do on their turn. And you want to have these cheaper spells to play with snaps, and you want to have the cheaper spells to get with teachings. So on their turn, if they try to commit literally anything, you can remand in Cryptic and it doesn't matter. And on your turn, you want to hit this Reclamation, and if you hit the Reclamation, you can untap and then do some nonsense on their turn. So you just want to have these Dispels to win Reclamation fights and protect your Reclamation sometime. Yeah, so that's why they're there. Then we have Hero's Downfall and Nimble Obstructionist. So Downfall, I recently cut the Display of Dominance for this card, and the reason for that is Display of Dominance was really good against... I tried to find a card that was 2 CMC that killed Jace, Teferi, and Liliana, and Display of Dominance did a really good job of that. But what I ended up find it happening is in post-board games against those decks, they'd bring in beaters, or they'd just be Jund and they'd have a dude or Liliana. Not necessarily always have the Liliana, or they'd have a Vendilion Click or a Jace. Not necessarily just the Jace. And Downfall really allows me to answer their Planeswalker, and it allows me to answer their creature either way. And even though this deck doesn't feel like you'd really need a 3 CMC answer to a creature, the fact that Vendilion Clicks and other random nonsense tries to kill you post-board makes Hero's Downfall a little bit better than Display of Dominance. Nimble Obstructionist. So this card, there's really 2 reasons this card is in the deck. So first is Tron. It stifles the Tron trigger of Ulamog, which is kind of disgusting and is one of the only ways that Tron can beat you, because you can't counter it. So I wanted some defense against that once I have gone off, and I don't want to be able to pass the turn to them and then get blown out by that play. It's also good against Ancestral Visions, which means that when the Suspend card comes off, there's a trigger that lets them play it, and you can uncounterably Cryptic Command them for 3 mana with this card. It also does a good job at checking Jace, and it sometimes snipes the Planeswalker, but its main reason is for sniping Visions and for sniping Tron. There are a bunch of really niche triggers that you can stifle with this, so you have to be really careful with what you're doing. And you can also pulse it back sometimes. Sometimes it just like flashes in and hits the Jace, which is totally fine. So that is the deck. Once again, things I'm considering: this Breeding Pool cut, this Life Goes On cut. I'm thinking of Murderous cut, Redirect, and for other cards that people asked about, why aren't you playing Torrential Gearhulk? I think is a common one, and the reason for that is it really doesn't matter what I kill them with. Once this deck gets so far ahead, you literally can hit them with a Snapcaster Mage 40 times. It just does not matter. I'd rather not put a 6 CMC card that's only going to late game in my deck, because a big struggle with the deck is not dying before you do your nonsense, not killing people after the nonsense has happened. The other card I got a lot of questions about is, why do you not play Search for Azcanta? And I started with it in this list. I thought it would be good. It really wasn't. So the reason for that is it takes away your 2 CMC plays, and these are all 8 of these cards. maybe 9 if you count the Logic Knot, are much better plays on turn 2 to not fall behind. You're not really trying to grind people out with this deck, which I think is a common misconception that a lot of people will understand once you see the games, is Azcanta lets you find one card, but it does not let you really go off in the same way that Teachings or some of these other cards will. Pulling When you have Teachings going, you almost never want to use Azcanta because Teachings will get you Nexus or Blue Sun reliably for the same mana. And if you can Teachings for Blue Sun or Azcanta for Blue Sun, the fact that you paid a card to get it really doesn't matter because it's going to draw you like 7 cards anyway. So Azcanta, I would recommend not playing it. At least start with this list. Maybe cut the breeding pool and maybe cut the Life Goes On. But start with this list and see how you like it, and go from there. So that is the deck, and I'm gonna pull together some matches for you guys from replays. So once again, the way this deck plays is really painful online, and it takes a lot of clicks, so it's really hard for me to commentate live games or streams, so I've decided to do this. So I'm going to put together some games, and I'm going to try to get a good cross-section of the format so you can tell me if you think this deck is real or if this deck is a joke. So I'm happy either way. I did not build this deck thinking it would be real, and I think it is real, and I think that people, once they pick it up and get decent at it, will really understand that it is quite powerful. But yeah, that's the deck, and I'll see you in the games.